Hey, everybody. We are going through a 6-week series talking about casting vision and training believers and the idea of finding Christians and casting vision to them about disciple making and making movements. And last week we spent some time just sharing some truths that we've learned along the way. Let me say a couple things. Next week, we're going to have one of my heroes on the planet, a guy named M.K. Bahardi, who is in northern India. And he's been a part of helping plant tens of thousands of churches. And it's got an incredible story and all kinds of supernatural things. And anyway, so he's going to join us in the middle of the night in India and teach us next week. And then the week after that, Roy Moran, who is just incredible also at casting vision. And hey, and I've sure learned a lot from him of how do you transition a church to think more about disciple making. Anyways, he'll be the week after that. Today, we're going to spend some time learning from each other. And there's a number of people that are ready to share. But at one point, we're even going to open it up for everybody and just going, hey, what have we learned along the way and found to be effective when it comes to casting vision conversations? So last week, I talked about, just some overall truths of casting vision. But when you actually get down to you're talking to somebody, another Christian, how do you lead that conversation? And there's just a number of us that are going to share some things. And if you've got something at one point, I'll say, hey, share that as well. We want this to be really just a discovery and discussion today. And I'll start us off by sharing just two real brief, simple things. And I just found as when I'm meeting with somebody who's not a pastor or, ministry leader, but I want them to get this, I think there's usually two main ways I do it. And one is I go, hey, can we do a discovery study, or they don't even know what a discovery study is, but through the parable of the four soils. And ultimately we'll ask this question, hey, which of these four soils do you desire to be on? Not which one are you, but which one do you desire to be on? And what I found is 100 out of 100 Christians, they say, I desire to be on the good soil. And I go, yeah, good. You'd be an idiot if you weren't. Yeah, of course, I want to be on the good soil. So the number two question, kind of at the end of the discovery study, and they've learned some stuff, I just go, if you had to be completely honest, which of those four soils do you feel like you live on most of the time? And what I found is most Christians answer the question with, I'm usually on the third soil, which a lot of times I'll describe the thorns really as too busy. It's not that they've died, their faith has died, but it's just that they've stopped growing. And instead of being maybe an orchard, they're more like a shrub. They're a fraction of what God intended them to be. And they have a sense that God wants more of them. And so at that point, now I'm not trying to convince them to be something. Instead, I just go, and I share with you something that's been really powerful for me in terms of someone who felt like I spent a lot of my life on the third soil. And now let's say I mostly live on the fourth soil. Yeah, can you tell me? Boom. And it moves into a conversation, be able to talk to them about DMM. So on the training and stuff like that. Well, that's one is I think the parable of four soils was made for vision casting and disciple making. And the second one is simply just thinking on a very personal level. I found the more that I talk about world movements going on, and all these things, most people that scares away. And I've learned that lesson. They're like, I don't really care. That's neat that that's going on, but it doesn't really impact my life. I'm already overwhelmed enough in my life. So I'll simply just ask, can you think of some people in your life that you want to see come to know Jesus, and you've invited them to church more times than you can count, and they keep on saying no, and you feel like you're stuck with them? I don't know what to do next. I guess I'll invite them again next Easter. And they always, if they're a Christian that has any care about people coming to Christ, they go, yeah. And I go, man, I know that exact same feeling. And I went through a training and learned some things of how to reach those people when you're stuck and where they won't come to church, but they might still have interest in discovering truth about God. And it's been revolutionary in my life. Would you like to learn that? Man, I would love to. And starts a conversation which can lead then ultimately to them going through the training, either one-on-one with me or oftentimes when we're going to have a training down the road. So those are two for me that just have been real simple of having a one-on-one conversation or with a small group of helping them. A couple people I asked to be prepped. Chris, you want to share some? You have one or two thoughts?
Sure. Yeah.
You always do that to me.
Say again.
As you always put me on the spot, I'm putting you on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I missed the last part. Yeah. I'm glad to be put on the spot. So a couple things I wrote down as Jim mentioned this to us is this, is we're casting vision. As we cast vision when we first started making this transition as a church, and really even today as we're casting vision to believers about DMM. First thing I wrote down is this: start with the problem. What's the problem? What's wrong with what's going on now? Because as you guys will experience in your churches, a lot of people are just fine with the way things are now. You know, what's wrong? The church is growing, man, we're paying the bills, man, pastor, you're preaching good messages. Like what's wrong? And the best thing that's helped us as we've cast vision for what's wrong is The Great Evangelical Recession by John Dickerson. So I pulled it up before I came on today, but I have a Google Doc. It's called Movement Talking Points. And it's what we used before our very first training years ago to cast vision to people in our church to come to the training. We would often start by saying, hey, do you remember the Meltdown series? Because as you guys know, we did a series at our church on the Great Evangelical Recession. And so that's kind of how we'd start the conversation. Do you remember the Meltdown series and all the things we talked about that are wrong? Yeah, man, that was really surprising. Hey, let me talk to you about a solution I think we've found to this problem, right? So and we know this from sharing the gospel too. We start with what's wrong. We start with the bad news. We're sinners. We deserve hell. But hey, there's good news. A Savior came, So start with the bad news. Start with the problem. What are you fixing to cast vision for, as a solution to some problem? So that's the first thing I wrote. We talk a lot about how, in the problem section, about how population growth is exceeding our multiplication growth. And we've got to multiply to keep up with population growth. So we're going to become less and less Christian, if we continue at our current rate. And we just talk overall about how we're losing ground. So number 2 is one thing that makes what you're about to cast vision for less controversial is if you start off by what I call like aiming high or aiming big, meaning you're wanting to talk to them about something that could reach millions of people. So when we start talking about 1 million in 10 years, nobody's going, if we just build one more building, we're going to get there. Nobody thinks our current, what we're doing currently is a solution to this big vision of we're going to reach the 1 million people in our region. We're going to reach the 5 million people in our city. We're going to go for the 300,000 that live in this. If you aim big, then nobody starts immediately thinking about solutions to that problem that they already know about, right? They start thinking, ooh, man, I wouldn't know how to do that. I'd have to have somebody help me. I have to learn from somebody. Like it's setting up this idea of training you to be a part of something like this because this is how God is working around the world. So I just have found that when you catch a vision for 1 million in 10 years, just to use our situation as an example, DMM or some kind of a multiplication strategy that leads to CPM is the only option. There's no debating. If God's given you the vision for 1 million in 10 years, you only have one option. So it's just not controversial. And it's exciting, right? To reach your whole city. I'm talking to a group of pastors tomorrow, and the guy that was asking me to share said, hey, just a reminder, we have 1.5 million people in our area. Brent, it's your area. 1.5 million, he said, that are nuns, that check none. He said, just cast vision for them to go reach the 1.5 million. That kind of thinking just causes you to go, I don't have the solution. I'm listening to what you're fixing to cast vision to me about, because what we're doing currently can't accomplish that. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So start with the problem, you aim big. And then the third thing I just say is this briefly, is wow them by letting them know they could be a part of something they never thought God could use them to be a part of. Did you know, sir, or did you know, ma'am, whoever you're talking about, that around the world, teams of 2 to 3 are reaching 100,000, and you could be on a team like that? Did you know, sir or ma'am, that there is this older guy in this UPG, Unreached People Group in India, that became a Christian his first year? He planted 48 churches. Did you know that God could use you to multiply hundreds or even thousands of churches? Do you know that you could be on a team of 2 to 3 to reach 100,000 people? Just trying to wow them. But did you know God can use you to multiply disciples? That's basically what you're saying. Do you know God can, that great commission that you read about, go and make disciples of all nations, did you know you could be a part of that? You ever thought about that? And what God could use you to do, what he's using ordinary people to do all over the world. So it's basically inviting them to think like, so God could use me to reach the million, to help reach the million. God could use me to help solve this problem. So I think we found it was helpful when we were casting vision to people to encourage them that they can be a part of this. And that, and often when you're talking like what I was just sharing with you, would blow their mind. I can plant churches. I'm just, no, Pastor, you plant the church. I just sit out here and I'm just faithful to come to church. No, God can use you to plant churches. God can use you to multiply disciples. God could use you to reach many, many people. So those are my three. Start with the problem, aim big, and then wow them by sharing with them what God could use them to do.
That's outstanding, Chris. Thank you very much. Hey, Suzie, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
I do. I prepared a couple of things. First of all, I maybe came at this a little bit different because I definitely love everything that's been shared. I early in my life, I did a lot of sales and had been through a lot of sales training. And one of the things that that we learned a lot was about qualifying people. And one of the things that struck me in all of this is the people that I have seen come into DMM and not just go through the training, but who actually seem to last, that have grabbed hold of it and persevered, are people that when you hear their story, they feel like this is the next step for them. It seems like that God has been leading them on a journey of, and that there's different details, but then they find this is the next step, whether they're a pastor or another professional minister, or they're a believer, a missionary, whoever it is, and it seems like this is their next step. So one of the things that I have adjusted myself to doing is to listening to people and asking a lot of questions, because my natural thing is to come in all guns a-blazing, very excited, really want to convince them this is the greatest thing, and use all my woo, not as much as Brent, but the woo that I do have to, convince them. And I'm really really into persuading people. But one of the things that I feel like the Lord's adjusted with me is to step back a little bit and to ask some questions and find their discontent, or to hear how is God stirring them or leading them. And this may not be for everybody every time. Certainly there's times you just go straight into these things and stories, but I've just found with longer term, I've begun to see more success, not just in people getting initially excited and going through the training, but longer term, more heartfelt commitment to it. I found when I lead with listening and asking some questions, I'm looking for their passion, and their discontentment, because it's basically this: I'm wanting to hook up or connect with what God is already doing in their life and help them to see how this is maybe the next step, or just let them know this could be the next step of what God is already doing in your life. So that idea of leading with listening and then asking some probing questions. And I don't know, that just for me has been effective in a lot of areas of life, and asking probing questions too with people, and helping people to see that God has more for them, sort of more of a discovery approach to vision casting, I guess is what I would say, rather than just giving them all the information. Certainly there are times I do that, but I've just begun to embrace this more in the last year, and it seems to be more successful. And then so that would be lead with listening, asking questions. And then the last thing I would just say is that I try to talk about this in the simplest terms of without lingo. And just one thing that I have found is the more that we are together and we talk about things and very much in a lingo term. And I've tried to even move away from using DMM and talk about movements of disciple making. One time in our coaching, someone mentioned that the people from Laos say multiplying disciples in churches. I just try to find different ways to talk about it without just using the lingo for a discipline for me, because I found that I get really excited and I start down discussing all of these things, and it can become overwhelming for people, and I disconnect from them somewhere because I'm so caught up in what I believe and what I've seen, and I forget them. So I try to stay very close to them as I'm casting vision to them. So this is kind of maybe something you can integrate with the really great ideas we've already heard. But I do encourage this listening and asking them some questions, and it not all be me on my side doing the talking.
Suzie, can you give us an example of a couple questions you would ask that would lead into it?
Yeah. So one thing which is very interesting to even ask a pastor is, so how are you doing with the Great Commission? Tell me about I heard one of the people have said, tell me about the disciples that your disciples are making. Just some really confrontive, probing sort of questions. Or just as simple as, where are you seeing God move in your life? Or how has God changed you in the last month? Or just some things like this, just to see if people are stagnant or if God's stirring them, or what, or how they're discontent. Now, again, this is not necessarily full on vision casting, but it's sort of maybe some entry into some really serious conversations with people, because how are you reaching the people that can't come to church? Some of those kinds of questions that, I think you brought that up, Jim, something about that. But the idea I have here is that in order to have longer conversations with people they're really going to commit to this, and it's going to become part of really the next step, and they're going to join us in this. It's, for me, what I've seen is it's people that God has already been leading them, and this is the next step in their story. They identify that. I've heard that very strongly from like Brent, or for all of us. All of us, it feels like it's just the next step, helping them to see this may be the next step for them. So
That's awesome. Thank you. Hey, Brent, anything you'd add to the conversation?
I just have two things that I'll throw in there. I think my video quit here. One of them is that I think people really relate with our weaknesses. So our tendency is to sometimes cast vision to people and tell them the things that you're doing or the way that you're winning. But I just found telling my story of like, listen, this is where I was in ministry. This is where we were as a church. And I went on a prayer retreat, and God got a hold of my heart and asked me a simple question, what are you doing? And it took me 3 months to really answer that question, which was, he asked me, what did I ask you to do? And forever I was like, start another location, start another campus, start another church. But the answer that he wanted was make disciples. And God's response to me was, then why are you building the church? You make disciples, I'll build the church. And I've also found, especially when you're talking with people who are not just pastors, but church leaders who have an understanding of how the church works, ask them the question, hey, do you know what the average cost of a baptism is in America? And when they hear 1.5 million, they're like, how did you get that number? And you start breaking it down, and people have never thought of it from that perspective. But here's something I've learned in casting vision for disciple making, and that is, let them ask the questions. The same discovery process that we go through to lead people to Jesus in a discovery Bible study is the same kind of discovery process that we want to go through when we're leading people to self-discover this for themselves. So I share my weakness, my story, where I was, what God did in my heart. I think that relates with 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. People relate with authenticity. And then throw in a couple truth bombs, but then let them ask questions. Don't be afraid of silence. You can speak till you're blue in the face trying to convince people to do disciple making, but you guys, they're not doing it until they self-discover for themselves that they want to do that. And the reason your story is powerful is because you laid yourself out on the line first. You shared your weakness first. You shared where you were in not making disciples first, then gave the truth bombs, and then let them self-discover their own weaknesses. Don't tell them where you're not doing it right, because discovery is a powerful process.
Hey, thanks, Brent. No, that's powerful stuff. Hey, David Deans has been walking with us for a long time in DMM, and I asked David yesterday, any thoughts you'd add to this, your experiences? And I think leading 2 different churches, right, with DMM?
Just one, and it's a kind of an established legacy church, and so I was kind of new to that. I came out of a church where Kevin Baker is still the pastor, And that's where we kind of started the DMM process, and, found you guys and Chris. And then during the pandemic, I got moved to a new church that's been around for a long time. And so trying to cast vision to them and to other people in the community is kind of where I am. But I love what you all are saying. I think kind of learning not to use the lingo like Suzie said was huge for me. The more I was using the lingo, the more they labeled it as that other cultish stuff. So if I start using lingo that's, more comforting to their ears, more familiar, movements or disciple making. For us, I'm in a Methodist, church. So using, John Wesley and the Methodist movement, everything that if I could couch it in those terms, I think people heard it better. Talking, John Wesley was, huge at disciple making and, seeing groups get started, and Holy Spirit and prayer, all of those things. So I just in fact, I did a sermon series, and it was basically the 7 Sail sermon series that some of you have done. But I took that and I kind of used some examples from Wesley's life and the Methodist movement as I was preaching through that series. And I think it felt like it was well received. I had several people, always, talking about it or excited about it. I even did the sale on kind of going to the lost, and I preached out of Luke, the Luke 10. And somebody on one of the chats or one of the Slacks was asking about Dave Ferguson and the BLESS acronym. Well, I kind of took a little bit of that acronym and a little bit of what Dave Ferguson, he recently came out with a book with that, but I really, dug into that using the DMM and Luke 10 and just kind of used that BLESS acronym, but made it more specific to DMM. And in fact, out of that, somebody started emailing to some of the church and was like, you know what, we want to bless our community. And right now we need to bless India. How can we bless India? And they were referring to several things we talked about with the Shema lifestyle and Luke 10 and going out to help people. And so a series, I think, can begin to cast vision, but just kind of personally too. I think that was the first thing I did. I wanted just to cast vision to friends, and especially some of my international friends seem to be the ones that caught this vision the easiest. And so I look for, obviously, on fire Christians, on fire, followers of Jesus. And then I look for people who were already discontent with the way the church is, or the American church especially. And my international friends, kind of coming from, one from Nigeria, another from Jamaica, kind of came into the American context of, that was just falling flat for them. And so casting this vision of DMM with them seemed to really take root. In fact, my one friend who's from Nigeria, both I have a friend from Nigeria and another from Jamaica. Both of them got trained in DMM after casting vision. The one guy from Nigeria is now coaching a guy in Africa out of Kenya. And this guy in Africa now has like 3 groups out of his village. And then my friend from Jamaica he'd retired actually and went back, he and his wife, back to Jamaica where they grew up to be missionaries there. And so he's trying to kind of incorporate disciple making movement stuff in some of his missionary work there in Jamaica, and is excited about that. So I think that's another point. And then just lastly, I'd say, I think everything can be casting vision if you let it, prayer walking with people. Anytime, I had somebody the other day that I invited with a prayer walk, and God did some amazing things on the prayer walk. And so that was casting vision. Now the staff person who came with me is more excited about DMM. And one of our other church leaders heard a story that we shared from that experience. So we cast that story of how the Holy Spirit worked. And now I got another church leader who says, the next time you guys go prayer walking, I want to go. So I think, everything like that can be casting vision. In fact, one time we also just used Chris's book. And I got a group of the church leaders together and said, hey, let's just kind of read through this and talk about it. Now, a lot of them weren't, weren't on board, but at least, you know what? We had some really good conversations about disciple making. And now I'm able to go and ask those hard questions like, okay, so you don't like this particular model, but what are you going to do about the Great Commission? What are you going to do about going to the lost then? If you don't like this particular method, then how are we going to do that? And so at least it brought up some good questions that I think are, well worth the price of the books and more. But those are just some ideas as we're casting vision. And I think I'm seeing some inroads here at this legacy church of mine where, they haven't thought about, things like this probably, forever. Thanks for letting me share.
No, that's great stuff, David. And even just thinking of, as you think about behind the pulpit and how to cast vision, made me think of, for a while, I wasn't allowed to say even the words DMM or talk about this stuff in my church, but we were seeing stories happen all over the place. So I was sharing these stories and using the language, and felt like that was a cheater way to do it. And that's, so stories are just saying series and stories you can share with people, and what's going on? Yeah, that's great. Good stuff. Hey, one time I was leading one of our breakout groups, and every single person that was in that breakout group, I think, said, well, I'm here because Barbara Lucas invited me. Barbara, anything you would share that as you're someone who has inspired a lot of people to want to do this as well?
Boy, I never really thought of it that way, that I was casting vision, because I just see myself as an encourager. And maybe that's what I'm sharing today, is that I just see myself as someone who says, you can take this next step. You can come to coaching. You can try this. We've had some people that have come and then they've not stayed, but I continue to just periodically text them and touch base and remind them that they're still welcome and encourage them to come back. So those were folks that came to coaching because I was on fire, and after our training finished, I just didn't want to let go of some of those people that I had seen a spark in, that I thought could, really take and go and run with things. And so I guess I did a holy bugging. I was a holy bugger. I just bugged people. And so now if I go to an event, they send people to me. I just had that happen a couple of weeks ago. I went to a district event and someone had some questions about disciple making. They're go see Lucas, she'll get you connected to coaching, or, so for me, that's more of what it was. And I'm just with Brent on telling your story. Our church has 4 prayer focuses every month. And one of them is to pray for our mission. And our mission is to make disciples for the transformation of the world through word and deed. That's the mission of the church. And every month I was leading the congregation and praying that for a year. And every time I would finish that, I'd go home and go, what in the heck are we doing? We're not doing discipleship. We don't even have any discipleship going. There's nothing happening. We keep praying for this. So I think when the training came, I was at that place of holy discontent and knew that I wanted more. And it was, I had had a couple of prophecies early in my life in my 20s. And I felt like the DMM was the first thing I'd ever found that could be a fulfillment of God's word in my life. And so for me, it had an extra layer of seriousness, I guess, because I'd been looking for so long for God's word to be fulfilled in my life from those prophecies, but had never found anything like it that would. So that's all I'll say.
That is the goal, is that you're doing it so well, you don't even know you're doing it. So awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Hey, can we open up? We've got so much knowledge here in this group. So if you're going, hey, I'm sitting on something I've learned that's been real powerful, or we found effective in casting vision other believers, I just love a couple more people to share. Or if there's a question that you have based on maybe something someone else has said, or no one said anything, but you're like, this is my question. Let's unmute yourself and let's do that for the next 10, 12 minutes, and then we'll break into our groups. Or the other option is we just go straight into groups. So, but anyone, yeah, want to go first and share something?
Jim, I've already shared, but I'll add one thing since nobody's piped up yet. So, and after somebody just mentioned this, and I wanted to add to it, I would often tell people one of the best ways to catch the vision over time is to come pray through the night with us every week. Yeah. And Jim, you know that because you were there. We just praying, on Sunday nights for 4 hours. If you just come and just listen to the prayers for a while and be a part of the story, and be a part of the meeting when stories were being shared and so on. I really felt like whoever said that earlier, that praying with people that are implementing this and excited about it and thinking about it and asking God for things related to it really is effective at casting vision.
I guess I could add a couple of things in there. First of all, everybody needs a Grace in their life because she is a great holy encourager or holy bugger. And but I hang around with a lot of frustrated people. It's easy to cast vision to frustrated people. And a lot of pastors are frustrated. So I kind of start with the frustration. Hey, what's frustrating about ministry? And everybody's got something. And then you can talk about the practical ways that disciple making can answer those frustrations. And so I found that, in fact, that's really what worked. I think God got a hold of me out of being wholly frustrated. I was just like, God, this system isn't working. And we began to pray. And so listen, as Suzie said, listen for frustrations. And then that's often where you can kind of meet them. I found that for the average churchgoer, I think they're looking for a world impact. So, like when you talk to them about, what's going on, they have a sense that Christianity, that the followers of Jesus and the impact in the world is diminishing. And so casting a vision that there is a way to make a world-changing impact, a national impact through influence of multiplying disciples, I think does catch vision for some folks. And then we've added testimonies. This goes back to the story part. We've added people sharing their testimonies, and we're trying to encourage people, share your testimonies of successes and failures, because we want people to talk about, you know what, I really felt like God was inviting me to speak to this person, to go up to them. I chickened out. But we're trying to get people to see how real this is. And you don't succeed every time you're learning how to do something. And so we're trying to make this process of learning to obey very real and tangible for people. And then I've also said, hey, here's something that's changed my life. I've been in ministry for 30 years. Let me just tell you, if there's a right conversation, here's something that I've found. And then one other way I've done it is to take one very practical thing out of the training and just talk about that. And usually in a way that they go, oh man, yeah, that makes sense. And then to say, hey, I got that out of a training I went through. I'd be happy to pass that on to you. This is just one example of a million things that can really change the whole way you see ministry and the whole way you live out of ministry. So those are some ideas and ways that I've found that God's used it to cast vision to people.
That's outstanding, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd just like to
go ahead.
share real quick. I think David Watson was the one who was saying that every conversation is an opportunity to cast vision, and I found that thinking that way to be really helpful, because if you want to have 70 conversations a week, it's hard to go and manufacture that unless you integrate it in the things that you're doing normally anyway. And so, I found that, speaking to family, just talk about what you're doing, and speaking to, church folks, find some ways to talk about DMM, have people over for dinner and, share something about DMM, and it just weaves in very, very naturally, and it really works. I think people are interested to know what's happening in your life, and as you share that, people I suddenly get excited about things and want to be involved. So, that's something that has worked for me last week. I mean, I had uh, a pastor over for dinner at my place, and he happened to be the superintendent, supervising 101 churches. And we talked about DMM, and he got like super excited. He's like connected me to the missions board of the Evangelical Free Church, and wants to have conversations, further conversations about that. And then I sent a newsletter, talked about that in the newsletter, and some other network leaders from the Mennonite Church contacted me and said, hey, I'm dying to hear more about what you're talking about. So, it's just use every opportunity, and God will do something with it.
That's great. Thank you very much.
I was just thinking too, I wanted just to, as Jim asked me to consider saying a few things. I was thinking more about how many times I've tried to talk about DMM and it's failed. There's just, you have a conversation and there's no life in the person's eyes as you're talking to them. There's nothing that sparks. There's a quick move to change the subject to something else. And so it just becomes obvious that, they're either God's not yet working in them, or that they don't have it's hard to know all of those responses, but it seems like there's a lot more of those than there are people that are super eager. And then I was thinking this morning in my quiet time about how Jesus cast vision, and his was just a simple thing, come and follow me. And I thought how our lives are so compartmentalized and private that we don't have an opportunity to really share life. And people like David Watson was saying that they try to spend life together, and that's part of, and Chris, I think you shared that too, that if you're not sharing life, then maybe that it lacks some authenticity there in terms of how we're walking out our faith, and that it's the being the disciple that's sometimes attractive to others, and it causes them to ask questions. So, and then I was just thinking about Jesus talking to that rich young man, and he said, go and sell all your possessions and come and follow me. And that was his casting the vision. And in that case, the young man just went away sad. So, not everyone's going to respond, but I thought it was important to talk about the failure part too. And but for me, it just causes my heart to ache. And I think it takes me back to intercession and prayer more, and for the Holy Spirit to be poured out.
Hey, Chris Galanos, I have a question and then I have a comment. When is your prayer thing that you do on Sunday nights? Is it like a prayer Zoom, or what is that?
So John, this was through our transition as a church. So we were doing it all together on Sunday night, and then now it's split up into all the different churches. They do it at different times. So right now we do the church I'm a part of here. We do ours early on Saturday morning once a month. So John, there's many of them now. There's not just one, but in our transition, there was just one on Sunday night. It started from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and then we moved it from to 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. Just because it was late for some of the people that were coming to be driving home. So yeah. What was your second question?
Well, my second was a comment, and this is coming from somebody who has a very different background than most of you. I spent 15 years recruiting wrestlers to Ithaca College, and then I've spent many years recruiting people to a company and selling fitness equipment. I think the most freeing thing and insightful thing that Jesus did was when he said to shake the dust off your feet, because you can become very discouraged when you're asking, you get up the gumption to cast vision to someone and then they just walk away and they're not interested. You have to remember what he said, because the one thing I learned from sales and recruiting and all those things is that you have to be able to take a lot of no's to be able to keep moving and not give up.
Hey, let me end with this and we'll break into groups. So I think we've heard this a bunch around here, but you think about casting vision, if someone can experience it, right? It's so powerful. And so if someone can come with you prayer walking or whatever, and but get out of the way, let them do it, not you. And I just got this text from a woman on our team who actually believes all the stuff we're saying here, but has not really experienced it herself. And so I had met a woman working at the Planet Fitness where I work out, and it said, "Can I pray for you?" And she burst into tears. This is a couple weeks ago. And turns out she came from a gang life, and the father of her son is just got out of prison and is trying to hunt her down. And she's trying to stay low key. She's got stuff in her life. And so we started talking, and I started sharing stories with her. And I said, "Hey, I'd love to connect you to a woman on our team who could teach you how to do this with your family." And she's like, "I would love that." And so this is from Cindy, who's on our team. She texted to me, I don't know, 4.5 minutes ago. She said, "You hooked me up with one amazing girl, 3 exclamation points. We had an awesome time. We hit it off. She definitely wants to be a person of peace and share the stories with her son and her friends and eventually even her family. I also feel like she needs lots of prayer for healing from past mistakes. So I'm going to be meeting with her and doing some prayer time with her as well. Definitely want to meet with you on the next steps with her as she takes this to her people." She is so open. Thank you so much. Right? I mean, she has caught the vision, but she got to experience it herself and is now going, "Hey, okay, what do I do next?" You know? So, man, throw people in there sometimes and let them set them up for wins. The sure way to cast vision too. Hey, can we break? Let's break into our groups and go through our questions and help each other get better at this. Proud of you guys.